coronavirus cases are still on the rise, but that isn't stopping some major amusement parks from reopening. Six Flags Fiesta Texas and Six Flags Over Texas are set to reopen to the general public starting today, but with strict guidelines in place. We also learned today that Disneyland Paris will reopen on July 15th. James Hardiman of Wedbush Securities and Yahoo Finance's Heidi Chung joined us now to discuss. James, I'll start with you here. I was just trolling some of our Yahoo Finance premium data. Cedar Fair stock only down 40% only year to date. We have SeaWorld down about 50%, and we have Six Flags down about 51%. Why is Cedar Fair outperforming those other two companies?
Yeah, I mean, first and foremost, I think they had better momentum prior to the pandemic than the other two. 2019 was a really bad year for Six Flags on a number of fronts. I think with respect to SeaWorld, I think there's two issues. One is that their return to normality might be limited by the fact that they have more fly-in traffic than the other two. If you think about Cedar Fair, Six Flags, well over 90% of their visitors are driving there. And so conversely, that number's a lot lower for SeaWorld. And as you can imagine, it's a double whammy if people first have to get on an airplane and then have to think through all the social distancing involved with the park itself. I guess the other concern for SeaWorld is just, they're sort of caught in the middle of the arms race, I think, between Disney and Universal in terms of new rides and attractions. And I think even once we emerge from this, that's still a hurdle that they're going to have to deal with.
James, which amusement park reopening are you most bullish about? I mean, is Disney still the one to beat here, even under these conditions where they're going to have to go wearing face masks and social distance and temperature checks and all that?
I think just given the high profile nature of a Disney, there's going to be the most eyeballs on that reopening. I guess in general, I'm looking most keenly on the state of California. So take your pick: Disneyland, Universal in California, SeaWorld San Diego, Knott's Berry Farm, which is a Cedar Fair park. California, as recently as a month ago, I had some real doubts as to whether or not they would allow theme parks to reopen this year. And more recently, you've had a number of theme parks schedule reopening dates for the month of July. Now, the local, regional, and state governments still need to sign off on that. But California is an enormous state in terms of its importance to the theme park industry. And so to the extent that we do see parks reopen there, that would be a big deal.
Hi, James. It's Heidi here. So speaking of California, speaking of SeaWorld, speaking of Six Flags, I happen to be in California, and I grew up 5 minutes from Six Flags. And when I was in high school, the lines were out the door. They were always extremely long. But just over the past, I want to say 5 years or so, that's not been the case. COVID aside, Six Flags has had its problems, SeaWorld as well. So, I mean, at the end of this, when we're done with COVID and we're all back to normalcy, things change for these brands and these theme parks, or do you think that they just have a long recovery ahead regardless?
I mean, I'm pretty bullish with regards to where they can get to once we return to quote unquote normalcy. And I view that as a vaccine is in place and people feel comfortable being around, other people in close proximity. Obviously, it's going to take a while to get there. I think 2020 is going to be a pretty brutal year. I think 2021 is going to be somewhat of a bridge year. But I look to 2022 as a year that potentially could be a record year for the industry. And maybe my context is a little bit different because I cover, for example, the cruise lines, which I think the questions are very much real, where those will get to after all of this. But I have a high degree of confidence that this is the type of family-friendly, outdoor, fun and safe activity that people are going to flock back to, assuming that we do have a vaccine. Six Flags has had some issues over the last couple of years. I do think all these companies are sort of wrestling with how they can be open and still be socially distant. And in most cases, that's limiting their capacity to about 50% seems to be the number that they've landed on, which is essentially saying, they're going to keep most days at normal. Normally, they're at about 50%. They don't want to go too much beyond that. Unlike a Disney where, if you've been to Disney, it seems like it's always packed. I think most of these regional amusement parks are normally operating well south of what the theoretical maximum capacity would be.
James, since you mentioned cruise lines, 1 year from now, are there still 3 main cruise lines in operation: Carnival, Royal Caribbean, and Norwegian Cruise Line? How do these companies make it another year when you have the ships essentially empty?
Yeah, I think there will be. There were some questionable times, obviously late March into April, where all these companies were wrestling with, how long it's going to take to forget about going back to normal, but just getting some of these ships back on the water, to your point. Most of them, I think Carnival still has some work to do to secure their liquidity position. But we're in a dramatically improved situation in terms of the solvency concerns, the liquidity concerns that they were facing, late March, early April. We're still at a point where nobody really knows where they're going to resume cruises. I think a year from now, most of these ships are going to be back on the water. But it's still going to take, I think, 2022 is probably optimistic. It's probably going to be 2023 before things are even approaching normality. But yeah, they'll make it. There's going to be a lot higher interest costs because they will have taken on a lot more debt. The equity is going to be substantially diluted because at least 2 of the 3 have had equity offerings. And there's a real question how many people are going to flock back to getting on a cruise ship. But I think they'll all survive.
All right, we'll leave it there for right now. James Hardiman of Wedbush Securities and our very own Heidi Chung. Thanks so much.
Hey investors, Zach Guzman here. Are you interested in learning more about the markets and getting the latest financial news? Well, then click right here to subscribe to our Yahoo Finance YouTube channel. Get the latest up-to-the-minute market analysis, big interviews in the world of finance, and information on how to manage your money every day wherever you are.